This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome to the Marvel Age Masterclass podcast with host Ben Morse.
Episode 11, 1968 Part 1, and Remembering Stan Lee.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Marvel Age Masterclass. I'm Ben Morse, coming to you from slightly chilly Las Vegas. I say that as it's like 40 degrees and pretty much fine, and the East Coaster in me is furious that I'm even complaining a little bit. Little bit of a different demeanor tonight, little bit of a different tenor, as we will get to some fun stuff. We will talk about some comics from 1968, and we will have a good time, but in full transparency, this is being recorded the night of the day that Stan Lee passed away. And obviously for comic book fans, this is probably a day where we're never going to forget. It was hugely impactful. It was hugely emotional. And it's kind of a privilege to get to be the first Place to Be Nation pop podcast that gets to talk about Stan. I don't know if we'll be the first one to come out, but we're going to get to talk about him and kind of reflect our thoughts. And joining me to do so is Nick Duke.
What's up, man?
Nick. Oh, man, just one of them days.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
But it's a weird day, man. Like, obviously I never met the man the way that you did, so I never worked at Marvel the way that you did, so it probably hits you a little bit differently than it does me, but we were talking about this, off air. It's just weird for me personally, like, being someone who's so firmly entrenched in comics at this point, big into the fandom, never knowing, like, how the general population is going to take these things. And, 10 minutes after the news broke, my aunt was posting about Stan Lee on Facebook. My aunt's never picked up a comic in her life, I'm reasonably sure, and it's just always interesting to me to see how far these things like this can penetrate outside the comics bubble, and just goes to show you how much of a pop culture phenomenon this guy has become over the last 50, 60 years.
Yeah, it was wild. I was telling you that literally I'm getting texts from coworkers and relatives and friends like offering me condolences,
right.
Which, it felt like, I felt kind of weird about that. I was like, he's not actually like a relative or anything.
Right.
And I met the guy a few times, but it was weird because I'll say this, it's like when it first happened, my first reaction was, I feel bad saying it, but it was kind of like this was inevitable. Like I as someone who worked there and kind of lived a little bit in fear of this day, just like, because we knew it was coming. We knew at some point he was going to go because he was 95,
Right.
He lived such a long, rich life. I know the last couple of years have been kind of different for Stan. It's been a tough couple of years for him. I know that since he lost his wife. Again, it's not like me and him were chatting on Sunday nights or something, but I was aware enough of what was going on with him that I know it's been very difficult with him. He was very close with his wife. They were married for like 70 years or something. So in some ways I was like, okay, good. Like this is a blessing in some ways. This is a chance for him to be, reunited with his love and not to have to go through this anymore. And then as I kind of processed and thought about it, and so I was like, all right, this is good. It's a thing that happened, whatever. It's an event, and I'm just going to move on with my day. Then I was just sitting around, and, I posted some stuff on social media and, put up a picture of me and Stan and did what you do. But I got to a point where I was just like sitting around. I was reading like tweets that people were putting on about him. And it was, of all people, I read a tweet from Seth Rogen, who wrote, I'm going to paraphrase, he wrote like, "Thank you for letting those of us who are different feel like we were special."
Oh, that's awesome.
And I just lost it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like I was like, God, that just sums it up. I was like, we were talking about kind of before the show, like what he meant to us growing up. By the time you and I were reading comics, Stan was not in his heyday as a writer. He was more of just a figurehead. Right. But just like for those of us who are comic fans and for those of us who saw ourselves as different and needed characters to relate to kind of get us through childhood, teenage years, tougher times. Like, this is a guy who basically created, universe is the easy term, but he created the playground that we all went to play at for so many years. And, for those of us who still do, we still do. But he just, I don't know, yeah, that quote really summed it up for me, that idea that this is a guy who gave so much to kind of the people who needed it most.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not just in terms of the Marvel universe, but at a certain point, he kind of became a cheerleader for the industry in general. Always more closely associated with Marvel for sure. But like when you say the word comics, I mean, most people, if they're going to know a comics creator, Stan Lee's the first name that pops into my head, or into the general population's head, I should say. And you mentioned like getting texts from relatives and stuff. The closest thing I'm trying to think of when a celebrity death that has been that way. Carrie Fisher to a certain extent, I think, because I had a lot of family who knew I was a massive Star Wars fan. And then strangely enough, the one that's probably the closest as of right now is actually Randy Savage. I remember when he passed away, like my phone like blowing up from like, because I remember I had aunts and uncles and cousins who knew that when I was a kid, I was just a massive fan. So that was kind of what this was like today. Even though I think just because when you say the word comics, like I don't think I've ever talked about Stan Lee in particular with any of my family members or distant friends or whatnot, but they know I'm into comics, so they hear the word Stan, the name Stan Lee, and it sets off that connotation in their heads.
Yeah, it's interesting, particularly like this exercise we've gone through over the last few months with Marvel Age and with Masterclass, that probably you and me and all the guys involved view him in a different way now than we did even 6 months ago.
Right.
Actually getting to appreciate and also criticize some of his work. I mean, the guy was not perfect. Like he, as a creator, he had huge flaws.
Right.
But I think really like re-examining and we're kind of just dipping our toes in it. Like we're at 1968, so we're only less than a decade in. But just seeing all the stuff he did, and just like at the end of the day, man, look, if he didn't take the chances he did, because you can argue till you're blue in the face, what was Kirby responsible for? What was Ditko responsible for?
Right.
But at the end of the day, the thing about Stan, beyond him being a creator, was people forget he's basically the guy in charge.
Right.
He was answering to his relative, Martin Goodman, but he was the one who had the guts and the wherewithal to say, we're going to do something like Fantastic Four. We're going to do something like Spider-Man. We're going to take these chances. And I'd argue that if Stan didn't do what he did, it's entirely possible superhero comics might have died out by the 60s. Because in the 50s, they were running on fumes. People were reading monster comics. Right. People were reading horror comics. People were reading Western comics. They weren't interested in superheroes. And all due respect to what they were doing over at DC, the stuff going on in Justice League, I don't think that's going to sustain beyond a few years in the 60s. I think if Stan Lee doesn't come along with his collaborators and create flawed characters, I mean, obviously, long-term, big scope, we don't have the pop culture icons we have today. We don't have these hugely successful movies, etc. But even on a shorter micro scale, I don't know if comics survives past the early Silver Age. I think it took someone with Stan's vision and his boldness to carry comics into the next iteration. Would it have happened without him? Like, would someone else have done it? Maybe. We'll never know.
Right.
But the fact is, he was the one who did it. So he was the one who, in many ways, kept comics going.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We talked a little bit about way back in, our first couple episodes on both Marvel Age and here on Masterclass, Fantastic Four #1 was kind of something of a Hail Mary. It was like, him just saying, screw it, I'm going to try what I've always wanted to try, and here we go. Like you said, the superhero side of things at Marvel especially was pretty much in the toilet by that point. So,
yeah.
And thank God he did, because here we are, oh man, 57 years later, still having a Marvel universe to talk about, so... Awesome.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he was special. I'll talk. I don't want to waste the whole podcast talking about my personal interactions with Stan. I met him, 3 or 4, 5 times. I got to interview him a few times. I definitely remember the first time I interviewed him,
right?
Because I was not at Marvel. I was still at Wizard, I was just out of college. I was out at Wizard World LA, and they told me I was going to interview Stan Lee, and I was like, this is it. This is it for me.
Yeah.
Because for me, I've said this to people, and it's not because I'm trying to be a douchebag. I mean, I do that naturally, but like I think people always ask me like, who are the hardest people to interview? Who are the craziest people to meet at Marvel? It was never the actors. It was never the athletes. It was never the famous people. It was people who wrote or drew comics that I cared about.
Right.
Like I was much more nervous to meet Jim Starlin or Fabian Nicieza than I was to meet Chris Evans or Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
Like I got super tongue-tied around them.
Right.
And Stan is, all that times 100 because this is the guy. The only thing I can compare it to is when also at Wizard I first interviewed Jim Lee because he was my hero when I was a kid. But Stan was beyond all that. He was above even the biggest writers and artists. He was the guy who created everything. And I just remember sitting down talking to him. I don't remember what the hell the interview was about. I'm sure he was promoting something, but I just remember how patient he was with me and how kind he was. And I remember most of all, because this was like 2005, 2006, and I was using a old tape recorder because we didn't have digital recorders or phones or anything yet. We had phones, obviously. Never mind. The point is, I was using a tape recorder, and he would not let me. Like I was done with the interview. I was like, okay, we're all set, and I go to push stop, and he goes, wait. And I go, what? And he takes the tape recorder, holds it up to his mouth, and just goes, Excelsior.
That's awesome.
And then turns it off, and he goes, and now you have that. And so it was just like it was a nice bit for me. The only other story I'll tell real quick is that at San Diego Comic-Con one time, I remember I was off to the side we had a stage that was probably 3 feet up at most that we were interviewing people on. And I wasn't in this interview. I was watching it from the side, but a couple of my friends and colleagues were interviewing Stan, and they got done interviewing him, and he came over to the side of the stage, and he just he wound up, but like did a full-on like jump from the stage to the floor. And you never saw so many people look like they were about to have a heart attack because they're like, oh God, if this guy breaks a hip or something jumping off this stage, it's all over for us. But he landed perfectly. He was fine, just walked and was on his way. And he was just, that was Stan. He honestly made everyone he came into contact with feel good about themselves. That's awesome. Made everyone feel special. He always told you, he always told you what a great job you had done interviewing him. And I think it says something that literally, I said this already on social media today, but every person I know who's in the comics industry, it's like, when someone passed away, like you were talking about Randy Savage, Carrie Fisher, one of those, everyone kind of posts their story and it's what it meant to them or when they first encountered them on film or something. The amazing thing to me was the amount of pictures on my timeline of Stan and other people I knew. Right. I was just like, he was so accessible. Right. And for someone of his legendary status, he was just so approachable and he was real and he was someone we could all, kind of share. And, I mean, I hadn't seen him in a while, but I always kind of liked the fact that he was out there. So I'm definitely going to miss that.
That's awesome to hear that he was really polite to people who interviewed him. I obviously don't have as much experience as you do interviewing celebrities, but it was always kind of intimidating because, especially with those really big names, I think the biggest one I ever got was Brad Pitt. It's like, what do you ask him?
Pretty big.
What do you ask him or say to him that he hasn't heard, or what that he hasn't heard a million times in his life? Especially with Stan Lee, there's nothing you can ask him that's gonna be some new thought you're gonna pull out of his head, and there's no compliment you can give him that somebody hasn't probably given him 100 times more eloquently than you at some point in his life. But still, it's cool to hear that he's super chill about that interaction and was receptive and polite. That's just awesome to hear that he sounds like a really good dude.
He was a legitimately good guy, and that's what I'm going to choose to remember. Just what a good guy he was, and the amazing gifts he gave us. Right. I mean, look at what he left for us. He's never going to be forgotten just because of the incredible universe of characters he created that we're going to keep discussing until they cancel this podcast. Can they cancel this podcast?
I don't think so. I think we're pretty. I think we're good with Rosero at this point, so we can pretty much do whatever we want. I feel like we're pretty independent at this point, so that's good. So let's, you know what? Let's celebrate Stan Lee the best way we know how. Let's talk about some of the comics he produced. Sure, man.
Now I'm gonna. I told you before we started. I know it's been a little while since you recorded your episode of Marvel Age. We're not gonna go too in depth on the plot of the comics you guys covered.
Right.
I had some more just as I was listening, particularly that I wanted to talk about with you, more so than the other guys, because screw them. I wanted to talk in particular about some like bigger themes and topics.
Right. I think the biggest one last time was we got off on the big like when do the Avengers become good aside, which I'm sure you want to weigh in on. So
yeah. We'll talk about that, but I'm actually going to go in reverse order.
Okay.
Start with the stuff that I really want to. I mean, that's how I like to do things on the show because I just want to. If we run out of steam by the time we get to Avengers, who cares? So let's talk about the good stuff first. So I want to start with Thor.
Yeah, awesome.
And obviously, I know you're the biggest Thor fan I know. So this is
that's a hell of a compliment coming from somebody who worked there for a while,
dude. And believe me, Thor was a beloved character, but I don't think I encountered anyone with the passion for Thor that you have.
Wow.
During my 10 years there, so you can wear that badge with honor.
I will do
so. You guys read a few issues of Thor from 1968, featuring various things. You had the battle with the Wrecker. You had Loki involved, the Destroyer getting involved. But the big thing for me that you guys touched on that I wanted to delve into a little deeper is, at this point, a few years into Thor, Stan and Jack are kind of finding their way in that Thor is a different character than a lot of the others. And what I mean by that is, when they first started producing Thor stories, they kind of tried to fit him into the typical overage superhero mold.
Right.
Secret identity, civilian love interest, all that stuff, the stuff that made sense. And by 1968, I feel like the pendulum has shifted, and now it's like, all right, well, what's interesting with Thor is that he is this larger-than-life character who lives in a fabled realm and has relationships with other gods, and the Earth stuff to me is not so much interesting. But what I think is interesting is the fact that through the decades, it's kind of ping-pong back and forth.
Right.
Like, you'll have the periods of, like, you would think, like, conventional wisdom, like, if you had just read up to where you guys have read so far, you would think, like, oh, all right, well, they had that initial misstep with him and Don Blake and Jane Foster and all this stuff, and that, once they got past that, this is what Thor is going to be. But no, over the subsequent decades, they would go back to that many times. Like, he would be back on Earth, he would have secret identities, and some of it would yield really good stories. Obviously, I think of the Walt Simonson stuff.
Yeah, Sigurd Jarlson was good.
Yep, Sigurd Jarlson, and people's mileage varies on Eric Masterson.
Oh God, let's not.
I don't think he's particularly beloved, but I mean, there were good Thor on Earth stories.
Right.
And I think just the fact that Jane Foster was, she had enough affection from fans that when she became Thor, for the period she became Thor, it wasn't just, all right, well, this is some random supporting character. This is someone we had some buy-in to. So I guess what I'm getting the long way around to asking you is, I want to talk about, since you are starting to read in 68, the really like cosmic, epic Thor stuff where Jane Foster's been replaced by Lady Sif as his love interest.
Right.
He's spending a lot more time on Asgard. Even when he comes to Earth, it feels like he's visiting
as his own standalone being. They would eventually, introduce Hercules as well, that had a similar dynamic, but it really helped to define him and set him apart. Because we've talked about on this podcast and on Marvel Age before, one of the reasons probably that Hank Pym kind of struggles here in the 60s is because he's just like so many other characters in the Marvel universe. There's not much of a hook to him. And I think with Don,
not saying anything new.
Right. And with Don Blake, you kind of had that a little bit because he had some similarities to Matt Murdock early on. They kind of let his handicap define him essentially, because we talked about Every time he was mentioned, he wasn't Donald Blake. He was the lame Donald Blake. And it was the same exact, Jane Foster, Donald Blake was the same thing as Karen Page and Matt Murdock. That's the closest analogy. But just in terms of that secret identity dynamic, we were seeing it done in other places with quite frankly more interesting alter egos that it became more interesting to just have him be Thor all the time. And later on, like you said, it does ping pong back and forth. I think most recently, in terms of runs that I've really loved anyway, I know J. Michael Straczynski kind of brought back the Don Blake alter ego there for a little bit, and I really love that take on it. But nobody really, in my opinion, talking about Don Blake specifically, has ever really been able to make that sing. Like, you can have it, and it can be an element, and it can work for a time, but most people have to get away from it pretty quickly because it is so constricting in terms of the stories you can tell, because you're forced to spend a certain amount of your plot on Earth. And like you said earlier, Thor has always kind of worked best to me anyway when he's more of a visitor to Midgard or Earth rather than a permanent resident. And that's kind of what we're getting to here. I mean, I know the issues we read for this particularly, a lot of it took place on Earth just because we were dealing with the Wrecker, who honestly never been one of my favorite Thor villains, but we can work around that. But you do get some good stuff here with like the Destroyer and, like you said, the whole Lady Sif dynamic that comes in. All good stuff here. And it does feel like Thor is starting to kind of find its way. Not that it has ever really been off its way. Like I've said before, I feel like it's probably one of the things that has been strongest from the jump of all the stuff we've read, and for what we've read for this podcast anyway, hasn't really hit a lull yet.
No, and to expand on a point you made, I think the whole he's a visitor to Earth thing works best. You look at all the best Thor stories, like even the stuff that's going on now, the Jason Aaron run. He's transversing the realms, doing all these great stuff. But when he comes to Earth, it feels special. He has a connection to these people, and I'd even argue going cinematic. You and I both talked about the fact that we're fans of the original Thor movie, the first one that gets a little overlooked. Right. And I would say probably the best part of that movie is how out of place he is on Earth. I think that's what makes it so fun, and that's what makes it so enjoyable and makes him so endearing. So I think when you there's nothing wrong with setting Thor stories on Earth. They can work. It's more just, what is his attitude? Is he just another guy? Like when he has the Don Blake alter ego, it's like, well, he's just another guy, just another superhero on Earth. But no, if he is the god of thunder, the Norse god of thunder, who is just on Earth because this is the ancestral home of his people, et cetera, et cetera. This is where his worshippers came from. That's a lot more interesting to me. And I think what we saw here was more of that. He's on Earth. He's fighting the Wrecker. But it's not because he's a resident of Earth. It's because he's a protector of Earth.
And he's a protector because he has an affinity for humans, because he is essentially, of all the Asgardians, he is the most human. He is fueled by ego and, selfishness more than anything else. And it's something he has to overcome during numerous stories throughout his history. But he is more like us than any of the other Asgardians, which is what makes it interesting.
You mentioned Lady Sif. We both did, and she's starting to come into her own as a supporting character here. Obviously, she has the whole subplot with the Destroyer, where she becomes the soul that is guiding the Destroyer in hopes of helping Thor. It brings them into conflict. I just find Sif to be so much more compelling as a love interest for Thor than Jane Foster. To me, it builds on what we already talked about, and that's the fact that Thor is different from the other Marvel characters. The Marvel characters who really work are the ones who stand out because they say something new. I'll even go so far as to say, like you talked about Hank Pym, but even look at some of the discussions we've had about Iron Man in these early Marvel stories. Iron Man's really, and Tony Stark are really not saying a lot that hasn't already been said either at Marvel or through other comics. Like we've seen rich guys who kind of learn their moral lesson and become superheroes. It's not that interesting, not that exciting. But Thor, a literal god, even Superman, who's godlike, doesn't act like it. He acts like he's just another guy, and that's in part of his appeal. So Thor being this different kind of character, this different kind of hero, makes him special. And I think by the same token, having Lady Sif, who is more of an equal to him,
right? Yeah.
Not the typical Marvel 1960s cowering female love interest.
Right.
Like, she's this full-on badass. I mean, for 1968, she's a friggin' revelation. The fact that, you know, she's an active combatant. The closest comparison point you have for her is Sharon Carter, who's kind of coming into her own. But I would argue she's another one of the great love interests. But Sif is just great in the sense that she can hold her own. She's an equal. She's a physical threat, and just so much more interesting. So in the same way that Thor is a unique character, and we like him because of that, I think Sif is unique in terms of the love interests and even the female characters we've seen. Just a really strong female character.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, especially like you said, in the context of 1968. I mean, Thor is the most physically powerful probably of the Marvel heroes that we've talked about on this podcast at this point. And so it would be really easy for them to kind of fall into that trap of, because he's the most powerful, he's always having to swoop in at the last moment and save the damsel in distress or whatnot. And that's not the direction they choose to go, which makes it really interesting. I mean, they did that for a while with Jane Foster, and it, you know, something about Jane Foster made her last to this day. I'm not really sure what it is, but, you know, this, I agree with you. This is a dynamic that's always worked a little bit better, even though I you know, Sif is a character that I almost hesitate to say that I want her to be tied romantically to Thor all the time, you know, because I feel like she can stand alone on her own, but of the love interest that he's been given over the many years, I think she's by far the most compelling and by far the most interesting because, like we touched on, not just a match physically, but like emotionally and mentally, and kind of just she does not suffer Thor's Thor's bullshit, for lack of a better term, the way all the other people in his life seem to. She is not going to put up with his grandstanding and just tomfoolery all the time. So always kind of love Sif for her ability to put Thor in his place, whether that be physically or otherwise.
Yeah, I think you got a good point. It's reductive to look at her as just a love interest or just Thor's girlfriend. She's a great character in her own right. And that's kind of the cool thing about Thor and his supporting cast is, look, there's some great supporting casts in the Marvel Silver Age. Look at Spider-Man, of course, being the most obvious example. But the thing that stands out about Thor's supporting cast is I don't necessarily want to, I mean, I love Harry Osborn, but I don't necessarily want to buy a Harry Osborn book.
Right.
But you got Thor where Sif can hold her own. Balder, I think, is Balder introduced in the 68 issue?
Balder's in this, yeah.
So Balder can hold his own. He eventually gets his own limited series. He's a hero in his own right.
And becomes a major part of the Simonson run.
Yeah, exactly. Becomes a huge part of the Simonson run. Simonson writes his own adventures for him. He's got stuff going on. We'll eventually get the Warriors 3. We'll get all these great supporting characters. But that's the cool thing about Thor's supporting characters is they can break off and do their own thing. Like, we want to see their own adventures, which is kind of a cool aspect. And I think Sif perhaps is the apex of that. She's the most interesting of the Thor supporting characters.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, the supporting cast is something I wanted to touch on anyway, but yeah, here, I mean, it's kind of starting to come into its own by this point, because like you just said, we've got Balder, we've got the Warriors 3, we've got Sif. Those are kind of the big five in terms of supporting characters, and they're all on the table here now. So setting the stage, for what Thor will eventually become in the not too distant future. I mean, kind of by the mid-70s, you've got Thor hitting its peak run up until at least modern times anyway.
Yeah, no, definitely good Thor stuff to look back on. And, the villains we touched on a little bit. You said your piece on the Wrecker. I think the Wrecker as a Thor villain is not really my cup of tea. I enjoy the Wrecker more in the context of the Wrecking Crew because they say something different. They're kind of those frat guys who are just like really obnoxious and annoying. And when they fight the Avengers, I think there's some value in that. The Destroyer is a great concept because it's just number one under Kirby's pen, visually beautiful. Not beautiful. It's just like destructive and intimidating. When they brought the Destroyer to life in the first Thor movie, they did it justice. It's just such a crazy force. But then that twist of there's got to be a sentient something driving destroyer. And interesting that aspect with Sif, I think made it even more interesting and even more intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've kind of praised or said at various times that the Thor book always kind of felt like Kirby's baby. And here in these issues, particularly with the Destroyer, when he gets to cut loose, I mean, that a large chunk of these, the last couple issues we read, was just one really, really long Thor and Destroyer fight scene. And Kirby was able to cut loose, and it's a visually stunning concept that has continued to work to this day. I mean, I've never seen a Destroyer appearance that at least visually doesn't provide something interesting. You can quibble with the narrative of it. You can quibble with the inconsistent application of how exactly the whole being tethered to a soul thing works, because various writers have had their own takes on that. But artistically, it's almost always worked.
Yeah, I think. It's a purely physical threat.
Right.
And that is what, at the end of the day, Thor is a very physical character.
Right.
I mean, he's not a thinker, really. No. He doesn't think his way out of situations. He's got Captain America for that, to kind of direct him and tell him what to do. I think also, at this point, we've definitely seen that Thor is Kirby's baby. It's the one he is most attached to. If you look at what he gravitates to in the years following this, whether it's New Gods, Eternals, all the stuff he wants to do is Kirby loves mythology. He loves doing these larger-than-life characters. And I think now, to bring it full circle, now that Thor has escaped kind of this tethered to Earth situation where it's just another superhero, Kirby can really show his stuff. I think he got to in the Ego story we read, but definitely here with the Destroyer as well, Kirby's really finding his own on Thor. I would completely agree. So another comic that's still kind of hitting its stride, incredibly so, given how far in it is. It kind of amazes me. I think, like we've talked about on the show before, whether it was you and me or me and other guys talked about, some of the myths of early Marvel comics, stuff like X-Men wasn't good until Claremont came along. The Avengers were always the A-list team, stuff like that. Kind of busted those. The other thing to me is, I don't think people realize how good, or at least how important and relevant Fantastic Four was, like how long it was. Right. Yeah. For such a long period of time. I think people just tend to assume like, Kirby and Lee did probably 50 good issues. They introduced all their big concepts, and then it kind of petered out and was never quite the same again. But I think you see it here in the 68 story, because you get the second go around with Galactus. And we've already seen at this point Lee and Kirby's ability to take characters like Doom, like Namor, like some of the other more enduring villains, some of the alien races, the Skrulls, the Kree, etc. And they don't just have one story with them. That's what makes it impressive. Doom can keep coming back and being an imposing threat. They keep having something interesting to say about him. With Galactus, it's kind of interesting. I'm of two minds about it. On the one hand, this second Galactus story it's fine. It's not the first Galactus story. It's not even that second Silver Surfer story with Silver Surfer and Doom, which I love. It's really, it's them fighting Galactus again, kind of retreading, going with it. And there's a big part of me, and I want to take your temperature on this. There's a big part of me that kind of wishes they do the Galactus trilogy, and that's the only time we ever see Galactus. Like, he was just that big of a threat, that they figured out one way to get rid of him. It's the same way over at DC. I was always kind of skeptical of them bringing back the Anti-Monitor. Right. I was like, he was the ultimate villain. He fought literally every hero in the DC universe, and he was just, he was at the center of the biggest DC story of all time, and then they killed him, and then you never need to see him again. I liked what they did with him in Sinestro Corps.
I was about to say, once they did bring him back, it was pretty awesome.
It was like, it was one of those times. But even then, I was at the split mind there. I was like, okay, they're doing a cool story with him. But on the other hand, there's something kind of neat about this being a one and done villain. And in many ways, I kind of liked Galactus being that way. They fight God. They're able to turn him away. And now they move on to other stuff. So, this is not the story that's like the one in 68 is not the Galactus story that makes me feel like, oh man, they should never have touched him again. Because this is still pretty good. Yeah, it's still Lee and Kirby. It's still interesting stuff. Really good stuff for the Surfer. But I will say that I think every time you bring Galactus back, there are diminishing returns. And even here in his second appearance, I think you're starting to see the diminishing returns. And you get to the modern day, and Galactus is used all the time. And he's a great character. He's a great look. He's a great concept. But, he never... I just try to imagine being a kid or even being an adult and reading that original Galactus story. I don't think Galactus will ever have the impact again that he did with that original trilogy.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Like you said, I mean, it's a little bit of a law of diminishing returns, but the story is still good enough that, it kind of passes. I'm interested to see as we go forward, the third, fourth, fifth time he pops up, kind of where it, you start to question when it's kind of lost that value, when it kind of has jumped the shark, so to speak. I know that other writers in the future will be able to do really interesting things with him, but I'm talking strictly in terms of this initial first 100, 125, 150 issues or whatever it may be. But like you said, it's crazy, man. Here we are, 77 issues in, a little over 7 years at this point, and this book is still singing. It is still cooking. Like it's not really showing any signs of slowing down. That's what people say. The first 100 issues of this book kind of set the stage for what the Marvel Universe is going to be going forward. And thus far, that's proven to be the case. I can't say enough about how pleasantly surprised I've been by Fantastic Four throughout this entire process.
Well, I think also the thing is that when I talk to you guys about like the earliest FF issues, like those first few issues, there are some growing pains.
Right.
It does not hit the ground running like fully formed. Like Lee and Kirby have to figure out what they're doing. They have a great concept right off the bat, and I think those first issues of Fantastic Four are very important. They're crucial in shaping what the Marvel Universe is going to be, and just the idea of the flawed heroes and the family dynamic. Like, it's all there. But really, once they get past that first year, that's when they really start cooking with gas. And by the time they get to, the 70s and by the 70th issue and what we're reading now, they've got this down. Like, they know what they're doing. It's that beautiful it's that beautiful period between where a creative team figures out what they're doing. Like early on, they don't really know they're pulling the pieces together, and then eventually they get to the point where they're just phoning it in. And so we're kind of in that happy valley in between right now.
Right.
Not to say that Lee and Kirby ever get to a point where they're phoning it in. I think actually they smartly jump off the book before that happens, but that's a discussion for another future episode. But I think here we're really getting the benefit of a team that knows what they're doing. We've seen other creative teams throughout history like this, but a team that knows what they're doing and just keeps delivering the hits.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of interested to see this is going to be the first really big, high-profile, wholesale creative team swap whenever that does come along. So I know we have a little while coming, down the road, but I'm excited to see what that holds for the book, just because the Marvel Universe to this point through this project has kind of been entirely the creation of Stan. You've had minor contributions from other writers here and there, but I am interested to see how the voice becomes a little bit more diversified. I know Stan's still got a heavy editorial presence going forward, but I am interested to see how different it becomes and how quickly. Yeah.
And another huge element that gets introduced in this year of Fantastic Four is he's not named as such, but the birth of the character we'll eventually come to know as Franklin Richards. Obviously, Reed and Sue got married. that was a big deal because superheroes did not get married. It was fine for like minor characters. I'm thinking, I don't know exactly when Elongated Man got married, but I feel like he was one of the first. But I feel like that was
original Black Canary. She was married. Wasn't that a Golden Age thing? I think she had a civilian husband. Okay,
too.
Gotcha. Yeah,
but it was always, the idea of these two prominent superheroes, and you're not going to get much more prominent than two of the Fantastic Four. Getting married was a big deal because obviously, we've beaten it into the ground on this show, but that does age them in some way. But again, look at Stan and Jack being bold and daring and being willing to say, like, no, this is the next logical step for these characters, and we're going to explore it with them. The same way Peter Parker graduated high school. He didn't stay in high school forever. These characters were having things happen to them. And obviously, Reed and Sue having a kid completely changes their dynamic, completely changes the dynamic of the whole Fantastic Four. And we'll get to see more of that moving forward, and how Franklin affects the strip. There's some cool stuff. There's some fun stuff. It actually ends up impacting not just Reed and Sue, but Ben and Johnny for sure, as well, as they become uncles and, they care about this little kid. But, I think you start to see Sue come into her own. It's been at times painful to read Sue in these first few years.
It's been painful to read a lot of female characters.
A lot of female characters, but I would say that in making Sue a mother, and we don't see it obviously in this issue, but I'm saying, using this as a jumping off point.
Right.
In making Sue a mother, they give her some agency. And some reason for being, and it kind of comes to define her identity to a point. When she gets some of her really good stories in the next few decades, she's not just the mother, but moving Sue Richards, Storm, whatever, from being just kind of Reed's love interest, being the damsel in distress, being Johnny's sister, being the girl in Fantastic Four, to she actually has a role. She's a mom and she cares about her kid, and she, in a larger sense, becomes a mother figure to the rest of the team. I think it's a good thing for Sue. It's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree completely with that. She's definitely of the four, the one that probably needs the most character development at this point. But this event, the birth of Franklin, just calls out again how remarkable it is how much these four characters in particular are being allowed to grow and change over the first 7 years of this comic. Obviously Reed and Sue being the most heavily affected, but like you mentioned, Ben and Johnny both having to now have that a little bit of added responsibility of being uncles. And I just continue to wonder, when did these characters become perpetually locked in place?
Right.
When does that concept come about? That's one of the things I'm most interested to track, because at a certain point, Peter Parker is perpetually in his mid-20s. At a certain point, Franklin is perpetually 6, 7, 8 years old or whatever it is. And it just kind of pauses. And I'm interested to see when that comes about, because thus far, not the case. And it makes reading these really interesting because you kind of have this added suspense to it, because you get the impression that Stan could really do whatever he wants to do with these characters at any point, and there are no tropes yet of the Marvel Universe. There are no unwritten rules that have to be followed. So, a very exciting time in the pages of Fantastic Four.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Stan at this point is writing the book not with an eye on what are the consequences going to be for what I'm writing 10 years from now. He's just writing and saying, well, what's the most interesting story this month?
Right.
What is the most dynamic thing I can do with these characters? Is it getting them married? Is it graduating someone from high school? Is it them having a kid? If that is what's going to make for the most compelling story, let's do it, and we'll worry about the consequences later. Obviously, at some point, like you're alluding to, it gets to a model where writers are constantly worried about the consequences and what's going to happen next, and there's editorial control, and there's marketing, and there's
merchandising,
all these other aspects. Merchandising. There's all the other aspects of what we can and can't do with the characters. But at this point, it really is, it's just like what's best for the characters and what's going to be the most interesting, what serves the story the best. And that's a lot of what makes these comics so good and so fun to read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we leave Fantastic Four, I want to touch real quickly on Annihilus, who is another classic villain. Actually, I would argue probably after Doom, Namor, Galactus, probably one of the more recognizable top-tier Fantastic Four villains, and even became a larger Marvel Universe villain in Annihilation. I think part of what makes Annihilus work is, you've got Doom, who we can relate to on some level. You've got even like a Magneto who has a point. I think you do have to have some villains who are just scary bad guys, for lack of a better term. They're just creepy aliens who have a dynamic design, and their motivation does not have to be terribly three-dimensional. Literally is just, they want to rule the world. They want to take over. They want to survive. They want to conquer. And I think Annihilus was a home run in the sense that it gave the Negative Zone something to kind of hang their hat on. Because obviously Blastar was not going to do that.
And it's a great character design. I mean, just from a sheer visual standpoint.
Yeah. And I just think Annihilus, look, he's not in the same way. I think when I was talking last Masterclass about the idea that Doc Ock and Green Goblin are Spider-Man's arch villains, maybe with that being number 3, and the other villains kind of slot in as, they're classics, but they're not top tier. I would say for Fantastic Four, you've got Doom and then got everybody else. No one's quite on the same level as Doom. Doom is always going to be the first guy they fight, whether it's a movie or a TV show or whatever. But I think if you're looking objectively at the rest of the Fantastic Four villains, Annihilus is up there as far as being important, and probably beyond that, just having some staying power. And it's all baked in right here. It's shown through, like you said, great visual, great motivation, and just a fun comic book villain in the sense that he doesn't have to have a lot to him. He's just a good villain.
Yeah, in terms of the staying power, I'm going to have to take your word for it, because not really much of a Fantastic Four reader most of my life. I can talk, on a very limited basis about the insectoid ultimate version of Annihilus, but that's probably all I've got in terms of that character. I know he becomes a larger deal going forward, and I am interested to see more from him, but this is kind of probably one of the only 2 or 3 Annihilus comics I've ever read.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, he never expands to the larger Marvel Universe until Annihilation, which is great, and everyone should read it, and we'll get to it on this podcast in 20 years. 20
years, yeah.
But I think he fights the Avengers maybe once, but he does remain pretty much a Fantastic Four villain. So if you're not terribly familiar with the Fantastic Four, you probably don't know much about Annihilus. But I think if you're an FF person who has enjoyed, maybe the John Byrne run or the Simonson run, and has read something, there's some good Annihilus stories out there. But honestly, I just think he's another cool Lee Kirby creation that stands above, say, Blastar or the Psycho Man. I think this guy has a little bit more credibility for sure.
Definitely more than Blastar and the Psycho Man. Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I don't think we need to debate that too much. All right, so we've talked some Thor, we've talked some Fantastic Four, but into every year, a little Avengers must fall.
It must. I guess.
We have reached the point. I cannot believe you guys spent enough time talking about kind of the meta discussion of the list and all that, but I cannot believe how much Avengers he's got us reading.
Oh my God.
From the 60s. It's crazy because Avengers is not good. The only thing, when was the list created?
I don't have the answer to that, honestly. Okay. It's been a little bit. I think the last one he did was 2010, so it's probably been 7 years. And that's one thing we've theorized is perhaps he was just working with what was on Marvel Unlimited at the time.
Yeah, what was on Marvel Unlimited.
I don't know. But like, okay, so early on, we had some tales of suspense, or we had, some tales to astonish or whatever, and it wasn't great, but it was important, right? Because it was showing you an early snapshot of what Ant-Man was like in the beginning, what Iron Man was like in the beginning, Captain America, Hulk, what have you. But I think we've kind of gotten to a point here, 7 years in, where we don't really need to check in with the Avengers all that often. We kind of get what the dynamic is. We know now it's kind of a rotating roster. It's not necessarily the big A-list guys.
Yep.
If the goal is to pick the most important stories, these aren't really important, and they're not good either. So if you're not checking off the box of important or good, it becomes a frustrating read at a certain point, and that's why we spent so much time on the last episode of Marvel Age just talking about when does Avengers become good? When is that point? Because we have not seen it yet.
So I mean, the first good Avengers story that I remember reading, and again, you and I are about the same age,
right?
So you're a little younger than me, but we're not Todd Weber old. So I wasn't reading Avengers as it was coming out in the 70s. I wasn't reading anything in the 70s. I wasn't born in the 70s. But I do know that the first really good Avengers story that I know of via trade paperback is the Kree-Skrull War.
Okay.
Which is coming in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And that's Roy Thomas, it's Neil Adams, it's good stuff. It's the first really epic Avengers story. And I think that is kind of a game-changing story for them. And then you get some good Steve Englehart stuff, and then it moves forward. I will say this. I don't think at any point in the formative years of the Marvel Universe, and I'm saying right up from the 70s to the 80s, even into the 90s, Avengers is never the central book of Marvel. Mm-hmm. Like Fantastic Four is for a while. Then I think Spider-Man is for a while. Mm-hmm. Then X-Men is for a good while.
Long time, yeah.
I don't think Avengers is the central book until 2004.
Yeah, until Bendis, pretty much.
Until Bendis, right. Until New Avengers, until they give them the Justice League roster.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's not really Avengers anymore because it's then becomes truly like, the biggest characters in the company all on the team at one point, which had never happened before.
Right. And then the interesting thing is, if you want to really get meta here, is the fact that the movies, for whatever reason, make Thor, Iron Man, Captain America the biggest characters in Marvel. So now you can do a quote-unquote classic Avengers roster in 2018.
But have it be your Justice League.
Yeah, but it is your Justice League because these are the characters everyone knows from the movies. Even like Black Panther folded him into that. All these characters have been introduced. It's a fascinating thing to think about.
There's a strong argument to be made that in the long run, having their, one hand tied behind their back in terms of Marvel Studios when they started by not having Spider-Man and the X-Men may have wound up being a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
In the long run, especially as it relates to the profile of the characters of Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America, those three specifically. Because now, Iron Man, I don't know how it's translating in terms of sales on his book. I don't look at Comic-Con numbers every month or anything, but the general profile of Iron Man as a character has never been higher. Because I remember when I was a kid in the 90s, I liked Iron Man because he had red and yellow armor, and I was a massive Hulk Hogan fan. So I was like, oh, that's a cool visual tie, right? But outside of that, there really wasn't. Because we were post Demon in a Bottle by that point, we were back to no real hook to it. And,
Iron Man was terrible in the 90s.
And now Iron Man, is one of those books that, one of Bendis' last project for Marvel was Iron Man because he was begging to write Iron Man. Dan Slott, which, my feelings on Dan Slott have been made well known in terms of his creative output, but once he left Spider-Man, he was begging to write Iron Man. It's just one of those things where Iron Man's become a featured assignment, and I think that dates back to the profile that those three characters have enjoyed as a result of Marvel Studios.
No, but getting back to your initial question, when does Avengers get good? There are some good stories coming up, but I don't think it's really interesting. And I don't want to get too into this because I think I've talked about it before. It's interesting to consider how important the Avengers are in universe versus how important they are in the real world. Because in universe, they are the A-list team that everyone wants to be a part of. Not quite in 1968, but not too far after. They're the team everyone wants to join. But in the real world, they're not the book everyone wants to pick up. It's X-Men. Or it's Fantastic Four at this point. So it's interesting to look at. I think it'll get good. Sort of, it'll get pretty decent before too long, and I'll let you guys judge that for yourself. But just in terms of why these particular issues are on the list, I mean, there's some significant stuff that happens.
Yeah, Black Panther coming onto the roster is somewhat important.
Yep. I think Black Panther joining the team is important. Vision being introduced is important. And then I think there's an argument to be made that, and this is the most tenuous of the arguments. Like I can pretty easily justify Black Panther and Vision being important enough to warrant inclusion. The other one, I think, honestly, is just the fact that eventually Avengers X-Men crossovers will be a big deal.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They're not in 1968 because it's two kind of books that are treading water, crossing over to try to make something happen. But I think there is something historically significant to seeing the first interactions between the Avengers and the X-Men. Unfortunately, as you pointed out, the story is not very good. These are not the X-Men we care about, and really, they're not the Avengers we care about. It's a very reduced and anemic roster. But I do think that might be the reason for inclusion. And the other thing I'll say is that even before you get into the X-Men crossover, the idea of exploring Magneto as a larger Marvel Universe villain is interesting, because he is one of those characters who will eventually become a villain who can cross over into other books. He doesn't stay solely in X-Men. He, like Doom, becomes a Marvel Universe villain. So I do think we're seeing some of that here, but again, that's just me trying to kind of justify why.
Well, and it
25 issues of Avengers are on the list in 1968.
And it makes sense given the fact that, Wanda and Pietro have played a role in the book for some time. It stands to reason that at some point you were going to have to reckon with the Magneto of it all, in terms of from a narrative perspective. So yeah, that was kind of neat to see. But like you said, still not very high quality.
If you want to talk high quality, the most high quality thing about Avengers 1968 was, to me, John Buscema, who is one of my all-time favorite artists. I think he's super dynamic. I think he's one of the guys who could actually step in and hold a candle to Kirby. I mean, he was not Kirby. Don't get me wrong. Kirby is in a league of his own. He's not Ditko. He's not Steranko, but there's something great about John Buscema's art. There's something really big and dynamic. He's a very good superhero artist, and would eventually prove also to be a very good adventure artist, because he'd do some great stuff on Conan and stuff like that. But there is just something about his art. Like I on the last episode of Masterclass, I think we discussed Don Heck. The idea that Don Heck was really, God love him, but he was really just, there was nothing special or stand out about his art. It didn't jump off the page, and it definitely felt like a downgrade from Kirby. With Buscema, I think you've got someone who can at least, like I said, contend with Kirby. And there's a reason he would be the guy to eventually do the How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way book, because I just think, again, as the kind of paragon of what's good about superhero art, he contributes a lot to it.
Yeah, I would agree. You've got some pretty cool images here in this list of issues that we read. I think particularly that Vision panel of even an android cry and all that stands out. So yeah, you're right. We're reaching a point. It's coming where Kirby's role kind of starts to diminish a little bit, and so we kind of have to have, going forward, these other guys step up and take more off of that plate. And Buscema seems like he's going to be one of the guys to take that on in the coming years. Yeah.
We can talk. If there's anything Avengers you want to talk about, we can. I really just want to talk about. You're like, get me out of here.
I'm done with it. No, I don't. Here is fine. Get me out of the Avengers in 1968.
The only thing I want to talk about is Vision, because to me, Vision's an important character.
Yes.
Not only because he's unique, not only because it is, and he is a Roy Thomas creation, which is, he's really, if you think about it, one of the first significant non-Lee Kirby Ditko contributions to the Marvel Universe. just in terms of being an iconic, long-standing character. I think he's Roy Thomas's first major contribution, because up to this point, Roy has really just been doing, his best Stan Lee impersonation. And I think with Vision, he creates someone who's unique, a character who's unique, who can kind of stand out. Cool design from Buscema, and just a unique character. More than anything else, though, I think what Vision will become, and becomes almost right off the bat, is the perfect character for Avengers. And what I mean by that was, when Avengers first started, it was the idea of, here are all these solo characters coming together in a team book. And it never really worked the same way that Justice League did. And so they tried to kind of course correct by having, all right, well, now we've got Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who the important stuff for them is actually going to happen in the pages of Avengers. And I think, as we've seen reading these issues, that didn't really work too well either. But with Vision, he's the first character where his story has been solely told in the pages of Avengers. There's ownership of Vision by Avengers.
Right.
Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, they all came from other books. They were created elsewhere, and their story just continued in Avengers. Vision's story starts in Avengers, and I think, we're still a ways off, like we've discussed, from getting to the quote-unquote good Avengers. But I think Vision's introduction is kind of crucial in the sense that he gives the book its first true organic star. I almost compare it to WCW and like a Giant or a Goldberg. Like, they finally created a star and didn't bring him in from somewhere else. Like, that's what Vision is to me in Avengers.
That's a great comparison. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but now that you say it, it's certainly true, because Captain America, I know it was created back in the Golden Age or whatever, but it felt like he was kind of that creation was entirely owned by Avengers, at least at first, and now it kind of feels like his solo adventures have become more important than whatever he has going on in Avengers at any given point. Another thing about Vision is, I don't know if it's just Marvel that was able to do it more successfully than DC, but it feels like a lot of these Marvel visual designs here in the 60s just spring fully formed, and you don't really have to tweak them a whole lot going forward. Whether it's the Spider-Man look, the Thor look, and now the Vision look, like, that's the best Vision look, and it's always going to be the Vision look. Like, you can try and tweak it, you can try and do different things with it, but eventually it's always going to come back to this classic green, red, yellow look, because it's just a great character design.
Yeah. And I think Vision's hugely important to Avengers. It can't be overstated, the importance that Vision has in Avengers. And now that Roy Thomas has his character that he can put his voice in, we're going to see what he can do moving forward, specifically on Avengers and just more in the Marvel Universe.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, so that's what we've got coming up. Dude, what else do we have coming up in 68? It's been, a little while since the last episode of Marvel Age. So November has been a crazy month for the Sarcastic Four, that's for sure. So whenever we get back together, we've got some Hulk. Hulk is going to get his own solo title back. At first it's Tales to Astonish, then it gets retitled as Incredible Hulk, so we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on the first couple of issues of early Captain Marvel. Nice.
We're going to get the first three issues.
Nice, but
Yeah, the first three issues of the Steranko Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. solo series, first three issues of the Silver Surfer solo series, and another Amazing Spider-Man annual. So we've got some debuts and some classic stuff that's been around for a little bit. A good mixture coming up on the next episode, whenever that may be. Hopefully soon.
Have you read the Silver Surfer solo series before?
No, never.
Say that 5 times fast.
I can't. I would not try.
It's some of my favorite stuff from this era.
Stan has always said that was. Silver Surfer was one of his favorite characters, and so it's surprising. I know he's only been around, a couple of years, but knowing how much Stan loved the character, it's kind of surprising it took this long for him to get a solo title. So I am looking forward to that. And of course, to me, of that list I just mentioned, I can't wait to revisit that Steranko Nick Fury stuff. So different from everything else that was going on at that point. I'm really, really excited about getting to see that.
Yeah. So there's some good stuff coming up. we'll cover it when we cover it. You guys get to your deal, and we'll get to there. But man, it was nice talking to you tonight, and I'm glad
absolutely.
we were able to kind of unload some of our Stan Lee thoughts and Lee memories, and then still get into a decent little discussion of some of his work. Because other than Avengers, which sucked, he wrote all of this, so he was still doing a good job.
Yeah, it was good to talk about that. Interesting, that kind of just happened. We had this recording pre-scheduled, and then it kind of just falls that way. So I'm sure I will be talking about it on other podcasts as well going forward. Most notably Hard Traveling Fanboys, which we got to record this week. So, I probably won't be able to add much more than what I've said here, but Greg will have his thoughts and everything. So it's
just direct him to this show.
Yeah. I'll point him. I'll point him this way.
I need the hits.
Yeah. Like you need the hits with your massive social media following. But So yeah.
No, this was a good time, and I'm glad we got together and did this. And I get you back for the next half of 68. So we'll do this again shortly.
Awesome, man. Sounds like a plan.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. R.I.P. Stan Lee. Thanks for everything. Thanks for the universe that we get to explore, and we'll never get sick of exploring. Till next time, class dismissed.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
PlayStation Nation's Justin Rosero and Chad Campbell here, and we want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlayStation.com, and we now offer them to you on 2 great feeds. On the PlayStation Wrestling feed, we bring you The Mothership, the place to be podcast, Main Event, Survey Says, Wrestling Warzone, a Monday Night Wars podcast retrospective, No Holds Barred, Jeff Learns Wrestling, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows. On top of that, we're also dipping into the vault, re-releasing the entire catalog of where the big boys play for your enjoyment. And in addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network pod blasts on topics old and new.
The Place to Be Nation Pop feed is loaded with great content, offering such tremendous shows covering the land of pop culture, such as Geek and Sassy, Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Sunday Groove, PTBN Play, Freak Out Drive-In, Songs with Friends, Looking Forward, Looking Back, and Lucha Undead, as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans with the Hard Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Conversation Comics, DC Post-Crisis Management, Marvel Age, and Marvel Age Masterclass, plus weekly pod blasts that cover the gamut of comic topics. The feed is also filled with insightful sports content, including the NBA team, This Week in the NFL, and more.
And you can find all these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others available at PlayStation.com. We cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, in-depth stretch projects, and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlayStation.com/Amazon while doing your online shopping. And download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar, ProWrestlingOnly.com, and TheHistoryOfWrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlayStation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.